a long, long time ago, you gave me a postcard, Bob, and it said, education has so much to learn. And I hung that up in my classroom. Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Dave. Thanks for joining Bob and I for our podcast, Thriving in Dystopia. And even though we always try and be professionals, sometimes we swear. So just know that going in. We are circling together. We are singing our heart song. Hey, Bob.
Dave, that was a good one. I remember that song.
Oh, good. Sometimes you just got to circle up and just get it going. How you doing today, Bobo?
Good, Dave. Thanks for picking me to do the podcast with this week. I know you have a lovely selection, and I always like to be picked.
Yeah. Well, I looked at all my other siblings and said, we'll go with Bob this week.
Yes. You hear that, boys?
Sweet. Yeah. Today we are recording after hours for the first time. I kind of feel like it's a little bit of a special occasion.
Yeah. This might be the new normal. Things are shifting right now.
Yeah. Partially because I've gone back to work and it's not too far behind. You're going to be going back to work.
Yeah, that's right. We are. And that's a lot. You know, I wanted to ask you about something. I feel like we're in this period where people either they're having a hard time responding. I don't know. Is this happening in your life? Like friends, family, coworkers are either not responding to texts or emails or taking a long time. And it's happening like in every area of my life. So I feel like something bigger is going on. Is that anything that's happening for you?
A little bit. Yeah. I definitely feel like there is like I don't know. I guess I feel like we're in like 6 months, right? We're about 6 months into COVID, and where everything has moved online to like these online platforms where every like hangout session, work session is all either on Zoom or some other video conferencing type format. And, you know, we've gotten so many emails, we've watched all of our YouTube, and I feel like at a certain point, I feel like we're kind of starting to check out as a culture a little bit. Yeah.
Or just burnout.
Burnout. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, man, I feel like everything we're talking about is like hitting a little bit on the 2-part series that we're about to embark on. But yeah,
that's
teacher
great.
Burnout is such a big thing. And circles are all about restorative justice, and us going back to work is like this time where we're going back into the classroom in some way, shape, or form a little bit, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. We're touching on a lot of the themes of the show already. Yeah, I think there is a collective burnout of phones, computers, because so much of our world we're now online versions of ourselves, and that's really hard.
I have this personal goal that's called Inbox Zero. I call it IBZ. It's like this unrealistic goal that I can get to all my emails, respond to all of them, and then I can have that like breath for maybe a few minutes before I get my next email where I can actually like feel that like sweet relief of IBZ, that Inbox Zero. But gosh, I haven't had an Inbox Zero since the pandemic started. And that was like one of my big goals before going back to school and work and all that. But it is not going to happen. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just this bigger thing that's happening, and it's important to be compassionate on ourselves for, you know, if someone doesn't respond back, it's not taking it personally, or if you can't get to IBZ, you know, that's fine, you know? Well, thanks, Dave. I think maybe we can launch into our topic for the day, and it's a 2-part episode on education and themes in education. You're an educator. I'm an educator. So I think we have a fair amount to say on this. And today, our first topic is actually something that I think extends quite a bit further than education, but has home in education too, and it's restorative justice and transformative justice. And I think we're going to start with you giving us a story. You use it, I think, at your school, and I'm curious about how that came to be. How did you get introduced to it, and then what it looks like for you? So I wonder if you could start us off, Dave.
Yeah, well, I first ran into restorative justice through conversations with you back in like the 2010s and sort of thinking about the judicial system in the United States and how it all relates to this prison industrial complex and putting people in jail and all that. And a great film came out that really kind of changed like everything for me about the prison industrial complex. Do you know the name of that film, Bob?
I think it's 13th.
No, good try. It is The House They Built.
Oh, that was a great one too. I had forgotten about that one.
And that's probably not even the name of the movie. We'll have to look it up. Is it here? Let me just call it to Julie real quick. Okay. Well, sometimes you just got to call to Julie every now and then,
Yeah, that's good stuff.
She'll get us going. But, yeah. So that kind of like opened my eyes to being like, we need to like rethink about, restorative justice. Oh, she's here. Yeah. Julie, what's it called? The House They Built? Is that what it's called? Gosh, sorry. This is just podcasting gold at this point. All right.
Oh, yeah.
Let's move on with it. Love it. Got turned on to it through that. And then it started popping up a lot when it penetrates a lot into elementary education. And I started seeing like workshops for restorative justice. And I just felt like I wanted to investigate it a little bit more and decide for my, like, just sort of see how it's coming into the classrooms, how we're like dealing with behavior management in these new ways. Because I think deep down inside me, I feel like I knew that it needed to start at a young age, like how we're talking about behavior management, how we're labeling kids and how we're like pushing them through the school system. Into like they often talk about the school to prison pipeline, and that's another like buzzword, and how we can fix that, how we can take steps to fix that. Because although at the time when I was working in Vermont, it wasn't like a big issue, because Vermont, like working at a private school in Vermont, is not necessarily where you're seeing the school to prison pipeline. But yeah, it all over the country, this is happening. And so I just felt like I needed to get educated, and I needed to like find some new and innovative ideas that I could use in my classroom to sort of do the work that I felt most called to be doing, which is social and emotional learning, and basically having those super simple but super complex conversations with kids. And yeah, I just started reading books on restorative justice. I went to a few workshops, and yeah, at the school I work at now, I'm kind of the restorative justice guy, but there is so much great education happening at my school. And I feel like it is like the conversations we have about behavior management and how to like have these hard conversations about kids that are carrying so much trauma with them has been like the best part of my job. And yeah, and I guess that's kind of why we wanted to bring this all here. But right. Yeah, really we can go all the way back to you, Bob, and the first time you ever like sort of opened my eyes to restorative justice. And wow. I'm super curious to hear more about that from you,
Yeah. And I will get into that a little bit later in the show. I had no idea that I was a part of your start. You said a lot of interesting things there. And before we zoom out into a little bit of the history on restorative justice, I'd be interested to keep on going on that thread that you've brought it to your school. And I'm curious about what it's meant to do in the school. So you talked a little bit about behavior modification, like in bringing restorative justice to schools, like your school and maybe others. why do it, and what are the goals that educators might want to get from using restorative justice?
Okay, yeah, for sure. There is, I guess, the biggest goal of restorative justice in the classroom. And we can also talk a little bit more, zoom out a little bit more. It's not just restorative justice when you're using it in schools, but it's restorative practices.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not just, so justice kind of has this connotation of talking about after an aggression has happened or something has gone wrong, and using justice a restorative justice model to fix that specific behavior. But restorative practices are kind of all the practices that go into creating a classroom that is interacting with kids to make them the best humans that they can be. And so that it incorporates a lot of like preventative measures. And some of those things can be simply like teaching meditation or teaching mindfulness to kids. That's like a pretty classic and catchy and popular practice that's happening right now in schools, is teaching mindfulness. And it has varying degrees of success, of course, but basically, like anything, if the educator believes in what they're teaching, it's going to go over well. And yeah, so if mindfulness is really like practice, and it's something that can be taught well. And so yeah, can you rephrase the question one more time there, Bob?
Yeah, sure. Interested in why educators would bring restorative justice or restorative practices to schools. What do they want to get out of it?
So I guess a little bit that we could talk about is the idea that there's a pretty common idea. If you think back to your education growing up, you as the listener, you probably have this idea that like teachers, there was like a lot of labeling. And if there's a quote unquote bad kid, or a kid that was like a problem child, that was the kid's fault. Right. And I think what restorative justice is trying to do is taking that label away, and rather than labeling these, like when a problem behavior occurs in a school or with a kid, rather than labeling them as the issue, what we are seeking to do is trying to label that as a deficiency gap. So they don't have the skills to deal with whatever happened. They haven't been taught the skills. So, and that goes a little bit along with the social emotional learning. And so an example could be, let's just use you as the example. You took a pen from, let's just use a random name like Nick. You took the pen from Nick, and Nick blew up. He got so upset at the fact that you took his pen that he punched you in the face. And what the classic example, what we're looking at there when Nick punches you in the face, is like, oh no, like Nick, you can't be hitting Bob in the face. That's like, you got to go see the principal. Like, that is not okay. But really, we got to look at all the skills that Nick needs to display to take that moment of Bob stealing his pen and look at them in a way that we look at any other type of learning, right? So Nick needs to like be able to have this like high, like frontal cortex, what's called like the wizard mind. He needs to have this like high level of thinking where he's able to process and be like, okay, what is going to happen if I rail back and hit Bob in the face? What's going to happen when I freak out and yell in front of the whole class? Is this really a big deal? And can I like check my behavior? Is this something that's been happening a lot? Is what Bob's done here an issue that I'm going to come across again and again? And these are all these skills that need to be taught to Nick before he sits back and rails on Bob, right? And if you look at another example, like a math problem, we clearly define these skills for instance, like if you want to solve, if there's 3 penguins on an iceberg and there's 7 penguins on another iceberg, how many total penguins are there? And we as educators, we label all the things that you need to have. You need to have like literacy skills. You need to be able to have the idea of what addition is in that problem. You need to understand that what a transition word is and how they're connecting and how, like the list could go on, and like all these skills are very clearly defined. And we as educators don't define the skill gap that's happening within a student when he has a behavior issue. And what I guess that's a really long-winded answer to answer your question, Bob, but that is what restorative justice is trying to do, and restorative practices. It's to take that skill gap that we're seeing, that some kids are able to like see Bob take their pencil and just be like, "Hey, Bob, can I get my pencil back?" Which seems like a pretty easy thing to do, but we're trying to take that skill gap and find the kids that don't have that social and emotional learning to get them up to speed and to have them operating in a classroom where they're able to be there. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think it does. Yeah. Sounds like restorative practices are about, at least in the examples you gave, around developing metacognition or thinking about what's happening in a situation before reacting to the situation. And is this something that you've put into practice in your classrooms?
Oh, yeah. One of the main tools of restorative practices within the classroom is the tool of circles. And circling can be seen in various different ways, but my 2 main circles that I deal with, my 4 main circles that I deal with are the morning circle, which is the check-in circle. And this is a way for us as a classroom to come together and talk about what is happening in our life in a fun way, but also can be deeper. So these are like when we circle up, we have questions, or I'll ask a question to the class and they're able to answer it as they see fit. And like a question could be a fun one, like would you rather be a dragon or own a dragon? Or what's your favorite type of ice cream? But it could be a little bit deeper. Like, tell me about dinner last night. And that could open up some bigger questions. Or when you see someone that you want to be friends with, how would you approach them? And these are just like opening questions that kind of open up the day, but get us to come together and create culture and community within the classroom. And then I also run a lot of circles that are called play circles, which are game based. And we use games to build teamwork within the classroom. And these circles also have a lot of buy-in for the kids to come to circles when they're a little bit more serious. So another circle that I like to run is called a peacekeeper circle. And peacekeeper circles are very specifically designed to give every kid a chance to talk about their deeper feelings. And it's a way for us to bring up issues that we're having with others within the classroom. And it also gives a platform for them to talk with each other. And then the final circle I run is what's called a restorative justice circle. And this is a circle that is a response to an issue that's happened that has prevented the class from learning. So that is a circle that can happen at any time if there is a bigger issue that's happening within a classroom. And it can just be like, if 2 kids are having an issue, it could just be me and the 2 kids. But if it's a whole classroom issue that's been happening, it's an ongoing issue, then the whole class, I'll stop the whole class and we'll talk about, we'll just do a restorative justice circle, which is a very specific design as well, where you ask 6 questions to the person that's been harmed and 6 questions to the person that's done the harming. Mm-hmm. And you can definitely look those questions up online. So, yeah, I mean, another thing about circles is, if you can see, they're trying, one of the things that they're building is they're building active listening skills. They're building empathy, which is one of the hugest things to talk about with restorative justice in the classroom. And more than anything, it is just this way for a classroom to create a community and a climate of respect and to have a place where you can feel heard and feel safe. And there are definitely like a lot of guidelines that you need to think about when you're running circles. And I'm not going to go too deep into that, but that's kind of like the basics of how restorative justice gets implemented in my classroom.
That's great. It's very interesting. And I want to ask you if you have anything else about the practice of restorative justice that you want to bring in before I talk a little bit about the history and one of the critiques of restorative justice.
Yeah, that sounds great, Bob. I guess the final thing I want to bring up is that this is something that is a tool that I like to think about with kids, but it's really a tool that anyone can think about with other people. And there's this idea of this threshold, right? And if we go back to that pencil example from earlier, Nick was definitely at a high threshold, right? And there's a lot of influences for that, why Nick might have been closer to that threshold. And it could have been stuff he's carrying with him from home. It could have been things that happened at recess, or it could have been just a lot of underlying causes that we don't really know about. And Nick is much closer to that like eruption point. And oftentimes as an educator, I think about when I talk with kids after an eruption, I like to use the analogy of the volcano. It can be a powerful image because it's something that we can all relate to. And to help keep that volcano from erupting, we need to think about the tools that we can give the kid. We need to think about those tools that we can help them with. And that's sort of the skill gap that I was talking about earlier. But we need to take a second and be like, what does this kid need? And a lot of those tools are simple tools like we're talking about with restorative practices like mindfulness and breathing techniques and social emotional learning, and having just like a toolkit that they can use in these harder situations. Because when we're talking about anybody, we don't know when they're like closer to that threshold. And it's an important idea for us to have that empathy, but it's also important for the person that's almost about to burst to know that they're almost about to burst. And that's kind of one of those things, if we can name those emotions for kids or really for adults, if we can name those emotions and see those and help them name it for themselves, then these kids are going to have a lot more of those tools in their toolbox to deal with these situations. And then a situation that doesn't need to escalate, or in a volcano that doesn't need to erupt, can just go on chilling like a mountain, you know? And I think that's the last point that I really wanted to bring up with restorative justice in the classroom, is that idea of that threshold.
Nice. Cool. Well, I'll talk about putting this in a larger context and then bring in a sort of another perspective on all of this. I'm no expert, but in doing a little bit of research and reading about restorative justice and transformative justice, it's clear that restorative justice has been around for a little while now, since at least the 1970s in wider practice. And emergence of it is what you alluded to, Dave, trying to develop a different model of justice than punitive justice, the one that the criminal justice system is based on, the punishment model, and instead thinking about basically looking at punishment and seeing, oh, wow, punishment doesn't work very well. The person doesn't really change. It actually doesn't deter this harm from happening, and it can really hurt the whole community, that form of punishment. And so a lot of restorative justice, the early stuff was developed by domestic violence advocates, and especially communities of color who were seeing this contradiction of men who were abusive, but then also when those men were punished in the criminal justice system, they were receiving really brutal punishments, and that wasn't actually helping the community. So trying to develop a different model, and restorative justice has roots in like a lot of non-Western practices. So it's a lot older than all of this. This restorative justice, as you described it, Dave, was developed in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond. And part of sort of why there's also a critique of restorative justice is that it was, oddly enough, something that the criminal justice system tried to bring into its mode. So it saw what was happening in communities, and it also developed its own models of restorative justice. So something that happens at UC Santa Cruz is that there is a restorative justice practice that the university maintains, but it does so in this way that ends up punishing students, and in a way that it gets to be the arbiter of what counts as restorative justice. So in the 1990s or so, activists were seeing this, and they were also seeing how it had evolved in a way where restorative justice was trying to restore things to how things were right before the harm happened. And it didn't look enough into, well, actually what was happening right beforehand wasn't really very good. It was still filled with a lot of issues and a lot of power dynamics that were toxic. So they started...
Maybe we were in that situation. We're a lot closer to that threshold, huh?
Yeah.
Meaning like trying to go back to a volcano that's about to explode is not necessarily where we want to go back to, right?
That's right. And maybe looking at why a lot of times what was happening is, and what happens in situations is this chronic abuse of power by people who have more power. And so like in that situation, Nick might be the non-power holder, and that Nick is constantly being put into positions of marginality. And that wasn't being looked at enough. The context, especially in regards to power. So activists wanted to look at that. They thought that was super important, that we have to look at what are the systems that are putting people in these places. And so that is a critique that developed this sort of, in some ways it does look like restorative justice because it does have some things around like circles, and it does have thinking around harms, but it's called transformative justice because it also aims to transform the conditions that got people there in the first place, especially with an attention to power, which also helps to prevent it from being taken up by the state and the criminal justice system and institutions in ways, because it's critiquing those systems as well. And it keeps it at a very, bottom up practice. So that brings in transformative justice. But I don't think, I think everything you said still is very relevant. I love the circles. And so I'm interested in talking with you about how to create something that is like a combination of like what you're doing with a transformative justice lens.
Yeah, I think that is a really important aspect. That what really speaks to me with what you said is that idea of kind of what it brings up for me is the idea of power versus empowering, right? Are we trying to use restorative justice to maintain the power systems of the classroom? Or are we trying to use restorative justice to empower the students within the classroom? And I feel like that's where I want to be. That's where I'm striving to go to. But to get there, you also, as an educator, need to give up. You need to give up the power within the classroom. And I feel like another idea that resonates with me is this idea of coyote teaching. And coyote teaching can be this idea of sort of teaching without a student or a pupil knowing that they're being taught. And I feel like that as well. I mean, there's some problematic things there, but yeah, I feel like, how do we give up the power in the classroom to empower the students? And that's a question that I'm going to try and be delving into as much as I can this year. That is actually on one of my 5 goals in my year, to sort of like my 5 themes of the year, which is something I like to do at the start of the year. One of them is empowerment by giving up power, is what I have underlined. So yeah, and I feel like that kind of goes along with, you can't run restorative justice effectively without being willing to give up the power, without being willing to give the power to the kids.
Yeah, that's right. And yeah, and it sounds scary, and I think it doesn't necessarily have to be like, I don't think students are in my experience, students aren't typically ready just to take the power and run with it and expel the teacher or anything like that. I think students, at least at the university level, really want a teacher there in some sense. And actually they seem to really want it. And by the university level, they're socialized in a way to really expect the teacher to do a lot, or the instructor. And so when I've tried to just give them the power all at once, it doesn't usually work. So I think that, and I'm curious to hear if you think the elementary school students would take it up in ways which would lead to chaos or something like that. But I wonder if, empowerment is, I think people are, like, we're taught in schools to not use critical thinking and to think about power. So part of that is just like maybe having circles where an analysis of power happens with the students. Like where is power in the classroom? Who has power and in what ways?
I mean, it definitely depends on the grade level, right? Especially at elementary school, there's like such a marked difference between a kindergartner and a 5th grader that it's hard to, it's interesting that they're in the same building, because they couldn't, it would be almost impossible to have them in the same classroom, right? Like a 5th grader is double the age of a kindergartner. That like says something right there, The next time, like a 5th grader would be double, they'd be in college, right? So there's a lot more learning that happens. But yeah, there is, it definitely, I think, would be chaos if you just like handed the reins over. But I think from that chaos, there could be a real gift in what could be learned from that. But really, you can do it in a safe way too, right? I think a lot about these circles. As like a teacher, there's like this idea of keeping a student in this bubble that's called the safety bubble. And that's where they feel their best. And that's where they're not, but it's not where they do their best learning, right? They're comfortable and safe and all that, but you need to push them into the next zone, which is the growth zone. And this is the zone where you're pushing the students, but they're still like, they're still grounded. They're still like grounded in the fact that they know that they're pushing themselves and they're scared, but it's not into the danger zone where there's like no safety net and it's like a zone of failure. And so like finding that as an educator, how can we get our students into that empowerment zone where they're in this growth zone while slowly giving up the reins to empower students to take education into their own hands and to take pride in the work they're doing and to build that resiliency that I think we all need, and especially like in times right now, but there's like never a time that a teacher sees a kid that has this resiliency and is like, yeah, that's not the most important thing. It's like every time you see a resilient kid, it's like, yeah, that kid is like going to be okay, and those are those moments, those growth moments that we need to like push the kids into without letting go of them.
Yeah, that reminds me of education around privilege. And for those who have privilege in a setting, the what's called pedagogy of discomfort is important, meaning that there needs to be teaching and learning that those people who have privilege are uncomfortable and they like sit in that discomfort and not get defensive, but rather try to listen. So this, of course, happens around race, but also gender, and ability and any power vector. So I think that is also a crucial aspect of transformative justice, where restorative justice doesn't really necessarily talk about these type of axes of power, race, class, gender, ability, etc. But transformative justice is very attentive to it and almost encouraging, for example, students of color to be in the center and be talking about the harms of racism and white supremacy while the white students listen and be uncomfortable. And so I think that's an important intervention into the restorative justice literature.
Yeah, Bob, I like all this that has gotten brought up tonight. I'm curious if this has felt like a transformative conversation for you.
It feels not necessarily transformative, but what I'm interested in is like you're doing restorative circles and restorative practices. And I think those are so good. And I think what transformative justice can do is use those things and sort of like repurpose them, like take the best of restorative justice and sort of just take it from a transformative lens. I think the practices of restorative justice are often quite good, but it's kind of just complicating them with this deeper analysis. So that's what I like about this conversation.
Yeah. I like all the toolboxes and all the ideas. And I feel like in general, I just feel like there's a lot of hope in education, right? I feel like this is where there's so much good work being done. This is like the work of our generation is like to like push the education into the next level. I feel like a long time ago, you gave me a postcard, Bob, and it said, education has so much to learn. And I hung that up in my classroom, my first ever classroom. And I really thought that like we need to find ways as educators to like take the education model and transform it and find those new toolboxes. And, over the next 5 years, I've met some of the most amazing people in my life that are educating on the high school, the middle school, the college, and the elementary school level. And you know what? Even preschool level, there are like so many amazing things happening. And yeah, I just love that we can push it there. And I want to keep that getting pushed because we need that, and we need it right now in the classroom more than ever,
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times when people talk about things that need to change in society, the conversation often ends up at this place of, well, I guess it starts with education. I think we need to educate differently about that. So that's what I hear you saying when, now we have this chance. There's really important work to do in education. I think that's a pretty good place to leave it, because next week we want to go into, so how is all this showing up in times of COVID? What do classrooms look like? For example, what do circles look like where you are and then in other places? So as teachers and instructors are going back to classrooms, what is that looking like? And that's a really important moment in the global, like what is happening in society. I think as classrooms are school is coming back together, that is a turning point. It will be a turning point moment, I think, in this like pandemic.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick question? When are you going back to school, Bob? When do you start up classes?
Yeah, I'm in on the quarter system. And so we start very late, about the end of September. So I'm still just working on my syllabuses. It's all up in my head right now. So I'm very curious about those who are actually in classrooms right now.
You working on your syllabi, or are you working on your TAN, Bob?
I actually need to say that the word syllabus is a Greek word, so it doesn't pluralize.
Okay.
So, and actually, my tan's doing quite well right now, surprisingly well in the fog of Seaside.
Love it, Bob. Yeah. Great. Well, I do want to say that the movie is called The House I Live In, and
we got
it took a whole podcast, but we got there. That is the name of the movie that changed my mind on the prison industrial complex, or opened my eyes to it. Anyhow, what we need to do as we talk about all those good things that we've seen and watched and heard is go to the tuned in section. Bob, what are you tuned into?
Yeah, let's do it. Well, it's just super relevant in a funny kind of way. It's because it's a high school movie. The genre of coming of age at the end of high school. And the movie is called Booksmart. It came out in 2019. Have you seen that movie, Dave?
Oh, yeah. I love Booksmart. That was it, Bob. It was one of my top 5 favorite films of the year 2019.
That's right. I remember that list. Yeah.
Or no, sorry, top 5 of the last 5.
Yeah, I want to hear from you on that movie, but I thought it was the best movie in that genre. You know, the genre of American Pie, Can't Hardly Wait, Super Bad, you know, and it was actually like a feminist movie in that genre, and it was so good.
Yeah, I would call it the buddy film, but I'd call it the high school buddy film is the genre you're talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah, it blows all those other movies out of the water. It's so good.
Yeah. Just watched that today, actually, Dave, and like, wow, this is a good one. I hope Dave's seen this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Love it, Bob. Well, I'm also going to share a movie. I watched a movie this last week, and one of my all-time favorite movies is a classic called Groundhog Day. And the movie I'm sharing is not the best movie, but it's a movie called Palm Springs. Have you heard of this one?
I've seen it. It's on Hulu, but I have not watched it.
It's on Hulu, and it is an Andy Samberg movie, and he is stuck in an infinite time loop, much like Bill Murray was stuck in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. Andy Samberg is stuck in Palm Springs at a wedding, and it is just so much fun to watch. I feel like I could watch people relive the same day over and over again for the rest of my life, you know?
Oh, that's great. That's MC Escher like.
Yeah. I'm stuck in a time loop watching a movie about people stuck in a time loop. There you go.
And that's your heaven. That's your heaven, Dave.
Yeah. Oh, probably not. But it's a fun movie. It's definitely watchable, and it does live up to this idea of just like the dog days of summer, which I'm all about right now. Just trying to hang on to that summer feeling as long as we can, you know?
You got one finger on the cliff, you know, until you have to fall in.
Yeah, that's true. That is the end of the summer. Well, Bob, I'll share out our social media coordinates real quick. You can get us at davepeachtree@gmail.com. You can get us at bmaze19 at Twitter, and thriving_in_dystopia on Instagram.
Dave, go into those classrooms, make us proud, and report on the other side of it next week, would you?
Yeah. Courage. That's what we need. Love you, Bob.
Coraggio to you, Dave.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Bob and I just want to take that second and thank you all for those years that you keep on lending us. It seriously means the world to us, and we couldn't and we wouldn't be doing this without you. So thanks so much. We also want to thank the artists for making our podcast a little bit more beautiful. The intro song is In Heaven by Drake Stafford, and our new outro song is called The Time for Action by Kennedy. And as always, the prolific and Enigmatic Joe Shine did our thumbnail art. Well, we'll see you next Tuesday, and I hope you have a wonderful week.
Action, 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 action.
Lisa y llanamente, la cruda y fea verdad la vivimos en el presente, tirados sin piedad y perdidos entre la gente, en esta realidad esperando pacientemente, el cambio ya se siente, te mienten. Los que dicen ver una grieta, presentan argumentos sin evidencia concreta, hacen de todo un cuento para que se ría al de al lado, un mensaje para ellos, números están superados. Tantos de mi clase que no tienen dónde ir, sin nadie que los ampare ni razón para existir, odiándose entre ellos al no poder recurrir a un sistema que los mata y solamente quiere huir. Se niega a abrir los ojos a ver tantas injusticias, la calle es color rojo y nunca salen las noticias, manipulan a su antojo, nos dejan en la inmundicia, pero ahora su despojo va a ser la única primicia.